Sorry, I'm eating dinner that'll arrive very late, so
It's
I'll,
okay.
I
It's
know.
okay. There are no rules on Drew's virtual happy hour. And to everybody else, we got a lot of new faces tonight, which is awesome. Matt's bringing out his crowd. My name is Drew. I work out in California for a small distributor called JVS Imports. We deal in a lot of like rad spirits and fun, cool stuff. I'm also a huge rum fan and a fan of tiki as well. And I've been doing these happy hours in order to kind of offer a little bit of escapism from, this pandemic that we're currently living through, which, sucks. And so being able to talk spirits and kind of unwind a little bit and have a good time is really been the goal of these happy hours. And I've been fortunate enough that I've had a lot of really amazing people come and join us. Tonight's guest is no exception to that. He is the editor-in-chief for the website Cocktail Wonk, but he's also been featured in Punch, Bourbon Plus, and Bevy. He is responsible for classic books like Windows 95 System Programming Secrets and the criminally underappreciated Windows Internal.
I agree.
and,
Mr. Holt would know all about those, I think.
And he is, of course, also the author of Minimalist Tiki, which, will take up a big part of our conversation tonight. He is a former banana slug. He is Mr. Cocktail Wonk, Matt Pietrek. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Good. So just so everybody knows, I have some questions set up, and I will, obviously go through that as time goes on, but it's a pretty fluid conversation, and it's obviously not too serious. I mean, I got a dinosaur behind me, so I don't take myself that seriously. So if you guys have questions at all, I ask you that you kind of start in the chat, and then, or there's like a little hand raise feature that you can do, which is pretty cool, where you can just kind of get our attention and we can bring you into the conversation. But, like I said, you can always just type your question into the chat as well. That way we can kind of keep the conversation going. And at the end, we'll just completely open it up and kind of let you guys go nuts. But if there's some direction that you want me to head or anything like that, like I said, just throw it in the chat or give comments. It's always kind of fun to read that stuff. But so Matt, bringing it back to you, in the early 1990s, that book that we were just talking about, Windows Internal, was basically like this reverse engineering that you did of the Windows system.
Right.
And which is just insane to me. But then now that I think about kind of what you do now when it comes to rum, it seems to make perfect sense. And so my question is, was it more complicated decoding Microsoft or wading through like rum industry marketing? What's more complicated?
That's a good question. I would say the ripping apart Windows was a lot of work, and I'll admit that I was probably 2 or 3 decades younger when I did it. I seem to have this natural ability to sort of like separate like factual information from fluff. It's like a lot of what you do as a computer programmer is essentially look at information and data sets and try to figure out like, how do I work with these? How do I manipulate these? And so, marketing information is no big deal to handle. What has been challenging though, and we may touch on this later, is the exploring, that I did in Windows and, ripping it apart and trying to connect the dots there has some parallels to what I'm doing now with rum history. Finding documents and getting little pinpoints of information and trying to connect the dots and figure out like, okay, where, I'm trying to connect these, where do I look? And having to retain a vast amount of information, in the hopes that someday these two dots will be connected. So in that regard, the programming I did and the Windows reverse engineering I did and the history I'm doing now have a certain similarity
there. Yeah. I mean, it definitely seemed like that parallel was right there. And and one thing that I had read up, on my the deep cuts Google searches today was obviously Microsoft wasn't too thrilled about that book when it first came out.
Not so much. I was public enemy number 2. So,
but eventually you end up working for them in kind of a capacity, and I wonder, do you think that there's anybody that you've talked about that in the rum industry that you're kind of like, hey, I started on their bad side, but maybe I'll end up being in-house at one point, you know? Is it just that devilish charm that eventually you just win people over?
Yeah, it's you know, it's interesting. I hadn't really thought of that parallel, but you know, it's like I think there's a certain amount of at some point realize it's better to have you like inside the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in. And so, you know, like I understand brands and understand, you know, need to make money and all those sort of things. And, you know, I see myself as sort of being the advocate for, you know, my prior self. Like, you know, what did I, you know, when I came into rum or tiki, like, what are the things I wanted to know, you know, and it was hard. I'm like, well, you know, I'm used to digging in, finding information, learning about things. And so, you know, having done that, I'm like, well, let's share it with other people. And that's, you know, and so, you know, I think that drives my ethos, you know, when I write, okay, what are the questions I had and I couldn't get answered? Well, find out and share them. So,
Yeah.
you know, and, you know, to a certain extent, brands that get that, who understand that, great. You know, we can talk, we can work together possibly. It's, you know, at the end of the day, you know, I don't see this as sort of transforming into a career where I work for a brand to do something like that. You know, it's not my goal. But I will work with them when we have things that are in alignment, you know, shared goals and so on. So.
Yeah, and you know, kind of just speaking of that, the blog starts in 2013, and you know, at the time it was, you know, you had all these ideas, you're doing all this research as you're falling like more and more down the rabbit tiki hole, and you know, your wife's kind of like, you know, stop telling me about this stuff, tell other people.
Right.
But I think even in your approach at that time was really unique, and even today it's unique because most of the time when someone starts a blog when it comes to spirits or anything like that, it's always like, well, here's my ratings and here's like my system and I'm going to get tasting notes and stuff like that. I mean, and of course there's times when you talk about, you know, that stuff, but for the most part, it's all about that history and things like that. So when that starts and you're starting to put this information out that's already unfamiliar, you know, to the general mass, I mean, were there times where you felt that you were just screaming into the void? And if that was the case, like, how did you stay motivated to continue to put this information out?
Right. I mean, there are times where I still feel like I'm screaming into the void. I don't think it ever goes away. I would say that you know, what I wanted to do with the blog, you know, evolved over time. You know, and I've told that to other people who are interested in writing. It's like, you know, you need to have a strong idea of what you want it to be. But you also have to be flexible in accepting that life may take you in different directions. So, you know, when I started, I loved rum and I loved tiki, but you know, I also love whiskey. I still do love whiskey. You know, for my 50th birthday, we toured 13 or 14 whiskey distilleries in Scotland. So, you know, I figured I was going to write all these geeky things about spirits, and I have. But somewhere along the way, you know, I came across, you know, especially in the rum category, there's all these great stories that haven't been written yet. You know, and whiskey's been this like much more covered, you know, category, and you know, I think to a lesser extent, like say cognac, or brandy, but whiskey, you know, like I have all these great writers, you know, Fred Minnick's and the Dave Brooms and Chuck Cowdery, you have those great writers, you know, and they've been doing this for a long time, and they've, you know, uncovered lots of great material, and they've written about it. But then you get to rum, and you're like, you know, it's kind of this Wild West, you know, once you move beyond the you know, the reviews and you know, the basics of, you know, basics of like, there's all sorts of great stories. You know, I keep coming back to the story of Ian A. Shear, but that's this fantastic story. It's like, it's just like dark matter that, you know, it's just an important part of the rum world, and nobody really knew about it. And somehow I won their confidence, and they shared information with me, and I shared that information out with people, and now, you know, it's common knowledge. People talk about this all the time, you know, and that's what motivates me is I'm trying to, you know, answer the questions that you don't know how to get answers to, or that maybe you don't even know exist, you know, and it's just wide open territory. And I'm still, you know, looking along, like working on, you know, there's always, you know, things in the background, like some days there's going to be a story, and I can't share them all with you now. But that's my motivation, is to sort of go tread on new ground and not, sort of tread where everybody else is walking.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I mean, and I do think that you've become that resource for a lot of people. I mean, when I was in Miami, or when we were in Miami for Rum Congress, at one point, one of the buyers from EA Shear came up and tasted the rum I was pouring and kind of bought for it. And I knew about them because of you. And then I had my little fangirl moment when she handed me her card, and I was like, "Holy crap! Like EA Shear like is interested in this stuff."
Yeah. Oh, Mark John. I bet it was Mark John.
Yeah, it was. And so it's really cool to see stuff like that. And like I said, to our guests who don't know, what I do is like, we were sitting in a rum training the other day, and it was really funny to listen to this guy try to explain Dunder, and he just botched it horribly. So then I grabbed, your article on it, which I think is one of the best ones on it, and sent it to people and was like, this is what you need to read. Don't remember anything that person just said, and you've become that resource for so many people. And it's like, if you type in anything rum wise, Cocktail Wonk is up there. And I know that there's strategy behind that. Like the way that you write tailors it to show up on Google searches and stuff like that. And I wonder, obviously you don't want to give away your whole secret, but like, are there certain things that you're trying to hit in each article to make sure that, I know this will be a good buzzword when somebody looks it up?
I would say, in terms of search engine optimization, I obviously try to, choose catchy titles, not quite clickbait, but catchy titles. And I try to make, jazz them up and make them, readable. That's something, that was a skill I've learned over the years and still learning, is like, how do I make this more interesting instead of just like a slog through a bunch of information? but I won't say that I've focused on like, appearing in every Google search. For me, it's more about, okay, what are my own damn questions, or what are the things that I keep seeing other people talk about, or get confused about, and sometimes they end up as my little rants. The thing about overproof rum, I'm just like, at some point, it's like, okay, I'm just so damn frustrated with this. I'm going to just lay out a bunch of information, and it challenges me to make sure that, I have my facts straight, and that I'm addressing all the points, and I'm anticipating what anybody is going to respond to this. But, I said, I'm in some ways, I'm trying to advocate. I feel like I'm being the advocate for the younger version of me who was curious but didn't have this information.
Yeah.
So that answered the question, but I say no. I'm not specifically targeting trying to like be in every Google search result, but I do follow the forums. I try to see like, where is the conversation going, where is the confusion, and that's a lot of social media monitoring, and and that's actually part of my role with WORSPA, is to sort of like get have a pulse on what people are talking about. So
yeah, that's one thing that you're definitely much better than I am at, is you're just able to monitor it for the most part. If you do comment, you just like drop a link to like one of your articles already discussing that, which it's one of my favorite flexes that you're able to pull off. Or somebody does it
at times, but yeah, sort of like, oh yeah, I happen to have written about that there. I don't have to rewrite.
Yeah. I think you handle it really well, because you like personally, you're like, hey, I'm not trying to be that guy, but here's this link, and then more often than not, people are sharing your links for you.
Yeah.
So like
that I love that. So
yeah.
like my work here is done. It means people have read it and has resonated with people, and so I'm very happy when that happens.
Yeah. All right. So we're gonna get just a little bit off my questions. We're gonna ask two from the group, and this first one's probably gonna be really hard, and I understand if you plead the fifth. But this is from Parker Case, and he wants to know what your favorite U.S. tiki bar is.
Favorite U.S. tiki bar? I'm going to evade the question to a certain degree and say that, like, I'm not going to say like I love them all. It's not like which is your favorite child. I won't do that. I would say I love certain ones for various different reasons, and like for example, Latitude 29 here in New Orleans is they execute flawlessly. Like the classics are executed perfectly. I've never had a bad drink there. In fact, I've never had the same drink twice and had it be different. Like they just nail it, and in that regard, it's fantastic. But you're also not going to sit at Smuggler's Cove, and go off on a improvisational, 4-hour journey with the bartender who's going to be like, trying new, interesting, crazy new stuff and trying it out with you or whatever, and in that regard, a bar like Devil's Reef, Jason, I love Jason. He just has this, we have this similar mindsets. And so I go sit with Jason and, without even thinking, suddenly I've got 12 glasses of rum in front of me and 4 cocktails and it's awesome. And it's just a different experience. And I love them both for different reasons. So.
Very cool. And there was a follow-up to that from Corey Schoolin, who wanted to ask what your favorite non-US tiki bar was.
Oh, Lord. I will regret, I'll probably regret later, like having forgot something, but my favorite bar city in the world outside of the U.S. is definitely London. Within London, there's obviously Trailer of Happiness and there's Locky Kane, both happen to be in the book, which is not why I'm saying them. But again, very different vibe. Like Locky Kane is, I go there and they do fantastic, interesting drinks with exotic ingredients, and the decor is very cool, and this one vibe, and I love the hell out of that. But I go Trailer of Happiness, and so it's your go, and it's a completely different vibe, and I love that too. So, and I'm trying to think what other, I was, I will say it's my favorite of all time. But what were you saying?
Mexico City.
Oh, Mexico City. Yeah, I mean, like we had a great time in Mexico City recently. Waikiki Tiki Room, a lot of fun. Very, very different, unexpected vibe. We were in Madrid once, and there's this little tiny tiki bar. I'm forgetting the name of it in Madrid. The little tiny Miguel.
Oh, Miguel.
What's it called?
I will come up with
I forget, but basically it's like the guy that basically Oriol Elias learned tiki from. This little bar in Madrid, tiny little bar, but it's brilliant. It's just sort of like a step back in time to the 1970s, and this is really cool. And so again, I'm evading the question, but I'm trying to give examples of why I love each bar for different reasons.
No, I totally get it, man, and I figured as much. I mean, people ask me like what my favorite bar is. Like, nah, I'm not taking the bait on that one.
Yeah.
It's just it doesn't serve me well in any way, shape, or form. But then you said you talked about a bunch of different stuff, and it's really cool. And then last question for now from the group, and this is actually from Anonymous, so they're keeping it under wraps. Okay. But they want to know what is actually in the muck pit. Any truth to the stuff that's online, dead animals, etc.
Oh, the goat heads and bat wings and things like that. Anything possible. The muck pit. My favorite description of the muck pit, and just if you're somehow you don't know what a muck pit, which I realize most of you may not know, it's essentially the goal of the muck pit is to create a whole bunch of really funky acids. Which in turn, when added in at the end of a fermentation, will combine with the alcohols to create all sorts of crazy other esters. And so the muck pit is sort of like your science laboratory of creating weird stuff. And there's a great description of it somewhere, but it's essentially the word I love to use with it is putrefy. It is essentially putrefied waste. And so, if you were to look at a chemical analysis in a muck pit and the putrefaction is going on in there, when you look at it from an entirely logical perspective, a goat head is no big deal. A dead bat is like no worse than anything else that happens to be in there. You certainly don't want to fall into a muck pit. I think it was Brian Davis once told me, like, if you go in a muck pit, you'd probably die within 24 hours. It's just toxic. But again, like you put it into the fermentation, and it creates additional esters, and which come through the still, and voila, now you've got those crazy Jamaican flavors.
That's actually kind of a great segue into the next question, because throughout your time, as a Cocktail Wonk, and I would assume even before that, like, you've traveled to a lot of cool places. You've seen a lot of different, spirits production, booze production in general, all over the world. And so I'm just curious, when it comes to that, like, what are some of those production styles or things that really kind of stick out to you as like, man, that was so weird, and that was so just specific to that place. I haven't seen it anywhere else.
Yeah, the most recent example I have, and it's one that other people have said to me, is River Antoine in Grenada, which is a complete throwback in time. Like if you just like close your eyes to certain moments, but kept them open most of the time, you would swear that you were back in like 1740 or 1810 or something like that. Just the river-driven water wheel, the boiling house with the coppers, and this is all rum history stuff. But like molasses doesn't spring forth from nothing. Like molasses comes from sugar processing, and in boiling house, where they had this sort of like copper pans that they would, the slaves would ladle sugar, boiling sugar water from one to one, from one copper to another copper, and then there's that, and then like the fermentation, which is basically like big concrete cubes, look completely old, and then the pot stills, which are like literally like you put wood underneath the pot stills and put the wood on fire, and that heats the pot stills. It's like everything about that is just like, you can imagine that this hasn't terribly evolved much since 200 years ago. So that's one. Obviously, Hampton Estate is gets a lot of attention. People love Hampton. I love Hampton. Hampton, to me, now having a much better sense of rum history and the evolution of it, Hampton seems like River Antoine plus 100 years. It's still fascinating. It's still terroir and crazy, almost like movie set dystopian, like weird place, but it's really cool as well. So those are the two that stick out in my mind. They're not terribly surprising answers, I think.
Is there one that sticks out? I mean, like, I think maybe it's Hamden, like that. It just ends up being your favorite distillery that you visited.
Oh Lord, I think. I'm trying to go back and just spin rapidly through all the distilleries I've been through, and again, they're all very different. I would say I'll give you a weird example, because it's a distillery I visited that isn't working yet, but Renegade. Renegade in Grenada is just incredibly fascinating, incredibly cool. I'm really excited about it because, like, it's all going to be island-grown sugarcane, and it's so brand new, so state-of-the-art, and yet they're so fixated on terroir and how they're going to preserve that terroir, and like everything they've done to make the distillery like ecologically, neutral, like it doesn't, not emitting anything, but and it's just set up in such a way that the production process is just incredibly clear, like these giant brand new cane crushing mills, and the bagasse, like literally the bagasse can be burned immediately. Like it goes from the crusher immediately and into the boiler, and is burned to create into the biomass boiler, and it's used to create energy. And then the horizontal fermentation tanks, and then the brand new double retort pot still and brand new column still, like state-of-the-art column still. They're like, like these guys get everything that's cool about rum, and they've brought the money in to create something state-of-the-art. And I'm just really excited to see how that comes out. And it's getting interesting. It's like a a traditional British colony, but making cane juice rum in a pot still, and a column still. But like, I'm just really excited about that. So, that could be my favorite distillery for another reason. So.
Yeah. So we just have, all kinds of fun questions.
Yeah.
And just so everybody knows, like I promise I will get to all of these. But you guys are definitely firing them off. So I'll fit them in where they make sense, and then sometimes we'll have to come back to them. But is there any distillery that you haven't been to yet that you would like to visit?
Well, all of them. I mean, the number one on my bucket list, which I don't know if anybody will ever get into, is New Yarmouth. Apparently, Campari people can't get into New Yarmouth, which is the Jamaican. The Jamaican distillery that's also owned by Ray and Nephew. That's just sort of like, okay, we can't get in now. I want to know why. I want to go see that. Been to all the Barbados distilleries, all the Jamaican except for that one. I've not been to as many of the Martinique distilleries as I'd like to. There's two. I've somehow not been to St. James. I've been to St. Lucia Distillers. I'd like to see some of the other Cuban distilleries. We went to the big one that Havana Club will take you to. I'd love to see the other Cuban distilleries that are even harder to get into. I've sadly not been to really any of the Latin America or South America, like I've not been to Venezuela, I've not been to Cartavio, that whole sort of Latin America, South America distilleries are something I'm sadly lacking in experience for.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I had read was, it's kind of, again, kind of perfect segue here, is that one of the things that you do enjoy doing is trying to talk your way into a distillery that typically doesn't let people in. Are there any stories that stick out to you that you're just kind of like, because I mean, I hear it from my friends all the time. They're like, hey, I tried to go to this place, they wouldn't let me in. And I'm like, man, how the hell does Pietrek get into all those places? And so then I read that article and he was just like, oh yeah, I talked my way in. So is there a situation you can think of where you did that? Because that's just hilarious to me.
I mean, to a certain extent, I've been very good at being in the right place at the right time. I think the article you're probably referring to is the one on Long Pond. There, I just happened to be incredibly lucky to be with a WORSPA group that was touring Jamaican distilleries. I was on that trip with Martin Cate, Camper English, Wayne Curtis, Kate Perry, Peter Holland, a few others. But yeah, basically, it was Neil Morris at WORSPA who basically pleaded with NRJ, like, look, we're going to be at Hampton anyhow, right down the road. Can we just like peek our head at the gate? And somebody at NRJ said yes, and suddenly like we're walking through climbing on top of the pot stills practically. But beyond that, I mean, for the most part, it's right place at the right time, but also, again, the fact that I write and brands understand that I'm not there to necessarily write an expose. I'm there because I want to learn and understand, and that I'm sharing vetted information, things like that. Certainly, being part of WORSPA has helped a little bit. That I can talk with WORSPA people and say hey, I'd really like to get into here, and they may have a little more leverage than just me as a random person showing up at the doorstep. So
can you elaborate on WORSPA
approach?
Yeah, because you've referenced it a couple of times, and I know it's one of the newer things that you're involved with. But can you explain what WORSPA is for?
Yeah. So WORSPA it's WIRSPA. WORSPA is the West Indies Rum and Spirits Producers Association. Been around since 1971. And you can think of WORSPA as sort of like, they don't love this analogy, but it's sort of like the OPEC of rum, but with less money. Or another analogy is the NATO of rum without a military. The idea is that, the Caribbean rum producers have always had a challenge. It's all, the rum in the Caribbean has always been not well paying. It's not like, the wealthy, it's not like the giant Scotch whiskey distilleries, with billionaire owners. Like Caribbean is still trying to elevate itself up in that regard. And so you know, if you look at a country like Jamaica, and it's like, okay, like we have Jamaican rum and we want to go negotiate trade deals with somebody else. Well, Jamaica is tiny compared to the US or Canada or England. And so there's all these little very small Caribbean countries, and they don't have a whole lot of leverage on their own. They said, we'll have more leverage if we work together. Like, let's have some common goals. Like, we're not, we're not a regulatory body. We're not not a compliance body, but the goal here is to take, these member countries, and, there are a lot, basically it's primarily the English speaking Caribbean, but a few others, but, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, Guyana, St. Lucia, et cetera, and basically let's find the areas that we agree on, and like let's advocate for trade policy and other things in that area. Let's do things like information sharing between our countries and our distillers. So for example, they do a thing called like alcohol school, which is once a year. It's essentially all the Caribbean, anybody who wants in the Caribbean who works at the distillery goes to one spot, and they all basically teach each other sort of like best practices and stuff like that. So it's a trade organization. People sometimes think that it's like they have some form of enforcement policies or they set regulations. It's like, no, it's a self-funded group of producing countries with associated member producers in those countries who work together on things that benefit them all together.
And so kind of an extension.
Yeah, I was say for them. Sorry, I forgot this. So my role for them is technically as community envoy, is to help spread the information about what they are, what they do, keep an ear to the ground, basically, these are producers and they're not necessarily well versed in social media or what, the rum enthusiast movement is. And I sort of, to a certain regard, I speak both. I can speak rum enthusiast, but I can also speak, like producer speak, if you will. So.
Right. And so kind of go back to a question we got asked a little earlier, so now it really fits. And I realize that I'm opening up a can of worms here, so okay. You don't have to go completely off the rails with it. Okay. But they brought up, the Scotch whiskey and the association and how they're able to kind of regulate stuff like that. And you just mentioned that, WRSPA is not that, but, do you think, or do you envision a time in the rum world where we're going to have more regulation like that? Or do you think just because there's so many different countries involved that it's just probably not going to happen?
Right. I mean, I certainly don't think that will happen in my lifetime. I think that, people forget that rum, there's a whole broader topic where rum fits in a categorization scheme, but basically, like no other major spirit category is associated with multiple countries. We talk about bourbon, it's US. We talk about Scotch whiskey, it's Scotland. We talk about Irish whiskey, it's Ireland. We talk about cognac, it's France. But rum is a sort of like uber category. And if you were to really think about it, like we should be thinking about Jamaican rum in the same way we talk about Scotch whiskey, or Cuban rum the same way we think about Irish whiskey, just making up examples there. But I think that, each country has their own vested, traditions, their own vested interest. And, this is the way they've made rum for lots of years. They've developed a business model that works for them. If they thought there was some better way to do it, they would be doing it that way. And so I don't foresee like all of the Cuban producers saying, we think it would be great if we all started like playing better rules that are also defined by the Jamaican producers, for example. It's both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because rum is so diverse and gets so many crazy things about it, and it's a curse because when it comes to regulation, it's hard. You can regulate within a country, but you can't really regulate outside of a country.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. And that's actually a really great response, and a surprisingly condensed one considering the topic, which is.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I could literally talk for days on this.
So I did find an article today that the timing is actually kind of perfect, but one of the questions that they had asked you was, where do you see rum in 5 years? And, you had all these kind of really great things, but the last thing that you said was, I'm really excited to see where rum production is in the U.S. in 5 years. And that is, we're here there. We're 5 years later from the time that you said that. So now now you're able to reflect on that answer. And I mean, obviously we have some, we got some, things that have emerged over the last couple of years. But so what do you think? I mean, what would you tell 2015 Matt Pietrek? Like, hey man, this is what we're doing now.
Yeah. I think we've definitely seen some nice evolvement. Obviously I would love to see even more. I'd love to see and actually now that I think about it, I'm going to qualify my answer because I actually asked this question. It's sort of a trick question on Facebook the other week or two ago. It's like most people don't realize that the U.S. is the world's third or fourth largest rum producer. That is that essentially, they forget like, oh, well, what country makes the most cane spirits? Like, well, Brazil. Okay, and then what? Well, India. Number 3. Like, it's either the Philippines, but I think it's the U.S. because people forget about Bacardi. They forget about Ceralis. They forget about Captain Morgan and St. Croix. Like, in that regard, the U.S. rum industry is as strong as it's ever been. It's totally completely in volume sales. So if you qualify that to be like craft rum, or whatever the term you want to use, you can certainly see like it's great. What Maggie Campbell and Privateer are doing is great. Richmond's still going strong. You start seeing, there's new rum distilleries are popping up. I'd certainly love to see more, but there's certainly some good, U.S. rum producers out there. I'm excited to see Johnny Verplanck, is his vagrant distiller.
Such a cool concept. I love it.
It's
so
a great
much.
concept, and like I wouldn't have envisioned doing that.
Yeah.
And like I said, I can't say like I've seen a huge explosion in distilleries who are focusing on rum versus, Me Too, like rum is a Me Too product. But, I think it's great, to see that, Privateer, sort of popping up there, gaining consciousness with people around the world. It's distributed by Bellier in Europe. I think that's a good, milestone, that then other distilleries can aspire to.
Totally. Yeah, it's definitely been cool to see kind of the growth. Now we're going to go back to some of the questions here. This is from Jeremiah Key. He wants to know what your views of the distilleries in Asia are.
No. I'll be honest, I don't have as much experience with them as I should. Just at some point I realized, like, my focus is on Caribbean rum, and like I love all the rum, I love all the cane spirits, I love Batavia Rock, but my particular fixation has been on Caribbean rum, in some part just because I've been studying Caribbean rum history, but like Chalang Bay, really interesting rum. I don't have, in terms of like Tom Dwyer or some of the other brands, Don Papa, sort of comment. I don't have a ton of experience with them. I'm trying to think of anything different. Nine Leaves out of Japan, I have some, but I haven't yet to crack that bottle. It's, there's a guy out there, Steve Maggery, who's sort of kind of doing what I'm doing, but for, Southeast Asia and Australia, as you're sort of like, plowing through all the distilleries. I just don't have the experience with it. I'm just so overwhelmed doing what I'm doing with the Caribbean that I haven't explored more.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to know everything, and
right, but
it's one of those. It's a spirit. Like I found in agave as well. Is like as soon as you start to think that you're getting a hold on it, that's when you realize how much you don't know.
Exactly.
And it's but that keeps you coming back for more. So for like my little squirrel brain, it's perfect. Because I'm like, I gotta keep learning.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Wait till you dive into rum history, and once you think you've got a handle on it, and and then just like layer upon layer of revelation. It's Inception-like almost. So.
Nice. And then we have a question from Anders, and he wants to know, what are your do's and don'ts and best recommendation for someone who would like to visit Jamaica and some of the distilleries there?
So I wrote an article about that. I could drop a link right there. But yeah, the thing about the number one thing I will tell people who are like, I'm visiting country X or island X, like, what should I buy? And there's this belief that you're going to go there and you're going to find all sorts of crazy, unusual brands or independently bottled rums, that there's this like cornucopia of stuff on the island that you can't find elsewhere. And like, yeah, sometimes there are local brands or whatever, but usually the best things that the distillery's making, at least for like the bigger islands, Jamaica, St. Lucia, Trinidad, the interesting stuff that they're making, the high quality stuff that you're after, is probably exported. So if your goal is to come home with something that you can't get somewhere else, you're probably going to be searching in vain. I mean, yeah, Jamaica has some interesting stuff like Charlie's JB. Charlie's
JB. I have a bottle of that.
Yeah, which is sort of like, if I remember, it's basically like J. Ray's version of Rum Fire or something approximating that. I was like, yeah, it's fun to have a bottle, but you're not going to come home with some crate. You're not going to come home with Valier, LFCH or something like that. The weird reality is that you're going to get better rums in Europe than you do by going to where they're made in most cases. And there's some exceptions like Martinique has some fantastic rums that we just don't get here. But yeah, and specific to Jamaica, my perspective of it was heavily influenced by his work organized trip, and we had a driver in a van who took us all over the place. I would be a little hesitant myself to just like hop in the car and drive around the island. It's a bigger island than you think it is. I mean, like Barbados feels very accessible, in a car. I can get anywhere in like in an hour or so. Jamaica is a little bit more big than you might realize. I don't know, Anders, is there any specifics you want me to answer about or ask about? So, next question.
Let's see here. Well, I think now we can kind of start transitioning into more of like the book talk and kind of what went into that. So, obviously when you start this blog back in 2013, I mean, was there ever a time where you're just kind of like, oh yeah, this will probably definitely turn into a book? And I know you touch on it in the book, so if people haven't read it, we're not going to give it away. Go out and buy it so you can really read about it. But, what, like, with that moment where you're just kind of like, hey, this definitely needs to be addressed. I mean, how many times did you have to share, like, this is how you start your bar article on those forums before you're like, I'm just going to write a book,
Yeah. So the story, the brief story is, I will say, I never pictured writing a tiki book till about 2017 or so. And, earlier on, I, had the idea of writing a rum book, and, I put together a rum book proposal. I went to publishers, and nobody was going to publish the damn thing because, oh, look, there's 2 rum books out there already. How could yours be any different? There's no amount of explaining is going to convince them that this was going to be different from Fred Minnick's book or from Dave Broom's book. But one of them was like, well, but cocktail books are hot right now. So if you did a cocktail book, I'm like, no, this is the rum book is the book I want to write. Damn it! And at some point, Mrs. Wonk basically said, if you don't write this fucking book, it's the tiki book, somebody else, Minimalist Tiki is a genius concept. If you don't write that fucking book, somebody else is going to, and you're going to be really pissed off. And, and I wrestled with that for several months and was like, fine, grumble, like, okay, and I put together an outline. And then confluence of events, of life-changing events, it caused us to sort of realize, like, want to quit our jobs. Like, we want to kind of like pull the ripcord on this tech thing. Okay, and go chase our dreams. And I'm like, okay, this means I'm writing and doing rum and cocktail things, and how do I make money? And suddenly, like, the book's like, well, that's a project. That's something you can do. Start with that, and figure it out, while you're doing other stuff. Get the write a book and then worry about what learn what else you can do. So, it sort of came together. It was like, okay, we want to quit our jobs, our 9 to 5, professional career jobs, and do something different. And the book was sort of like, well, I guess now's the time we're going to write it. So.
Yeah, for sure. And Parker Case actually had a question regarding that. Like, what are your thoughts on getting distribution for your book versus doing it kind of DIY, how you're rolling right now? Is it the niche audience that allows you to sell it the way that you're selling it right now?
Yeah, so, it's a great question. We thought a lot about that. I realized that many of you here, I'm looking at my screen, are passionate tiki enthusiasts. They love the cocktails. It's a lifestyle. They'll go to bars. They'll travel. They'll travel to go to bars. And like, okay, call me cynical, but I'm like, there's disposable income. They love the stuff. They'll spend money on it. And if I can provide something that provides good value, they'll maybe send it to me, give some to us for what we've done. And so, and we looked at the economics. I'd written, you mentioned, my Windows books, and that was a publisher, and I know how much money I got from that. I knew that publishing model worked, and was like, I'm not going to invest, like, I don't know, 5,000 hours or whatever the amount of time is to make, $5,000 or $10,000. It's like working for like $2 an hour. Like, okay, like, will I get more distribution? Yes. Like, will I make more money? No. And so, we did the math a bunch of different ways, and we realized it's like, oh, I have, social media, I have, fair number of followers, I have networks that I can communicate that, hey, there's this book out there. So I can leverage those, get the word out, and if we're willing to part with a lot of our money up front to print the damn things, it's just, a luxury a lot of people don't have. But like, oh, we happen to have the money from, our careers and selling our house. So like, oh, we can buy the things or print the damn things ourselves rather than letting somebody else print them and then take all the money from that. So there was a confluence of events that caused us to go the way we do. And so, yeah, like, if the book were on Amazon, I'm sure it would have sold more, maybe double, maybe 4 times, but we still wouldn't have made the same amount of money from it so far. So.
Yeah. Well, and I can only speak to my personal experience with it, but I think the first time I attempted to try to buy the book was when I met you for the first time in person, which was at the San Francisco Rum Fest.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, hey, I want to buy a book today. The event was just about to start. So I was like, but I got to go back to my table and make sure I'm pouring rum. And then, that event was just chaos.
Right.
So I didn't get to do it. But then at Rum Congress, I saw you. I was in the annex, so we were kind of a little bit slower than the rest of the event. And I was like, stop right now. I got to buy a book. Unfortunately, and now I have that experience. And then what was also cool was that, Rum Congress is, and I completely forgot about the competition in terms of getting it like signed by people.
Right.
Like Marie King walked up, she's like, do you want me to sign it? And I was all, yeah, sure. Like, if you want, because she wanted to sign her page. And then I remember, I was like, oh yeah, he's doing that whole thing. Where,
yeah.
Which I think it's such a cool idea, and it's such a great way to give back to those bars that have,
exactly.
like giving you cocktails and giving you that. And it actually, that's a question that Kurt had was, what was the decision-making process that went into deciding who you were going to feature and their cocktails and stuff like that? Like, what was that process like?
Great question. So I would, I had a vision early on of what I wanted it to be, and I wanted it to be a substantial book. I didn't want, a little, like 7-inch by 9-inch, 3/4 of an inch book. I wanted something, honestly, that would look good on a shelf compared to some other well-known books. And I knew, like, the content I had, and it's like, okay, this will cover about this much, but I also happen to know that I had this particular passion for what I call the modern tiki warriors. Prime example I keep coming back to is Jason Alexander, but lots of other people who are now in the book, but of like, hey, there's a lot of people out there, not just the few people we always talk about. They're great. We love them. We appreciate the contribution. There's other people out there who are doing great work. Let's celebrate them. Let's shine the spotlight on them. And, so it was, in a certain regard, it was kind of a no-brainer. It's like, well, who are the people who are, they're active on social media, they're sharing recipes, who are the ones who are coming up with great stuff? And, to a large extent, the first pass was just like, hey, who are all these great people we know who might be interested? And then, there was, then a certain amount of talking with other people. I'm like, hey, like, who, these are the people we're thinking of. And like, who else should be in there? Like, for example, Jeannie Grant came into the book very late in the project, but Carrie and I, my wife, we met Jeannie, and like within half an hour, like, oh my God, she has to be in the book. And luckily, she agreed to be in the book. So it was very much a two birds with one stone. A bit more content, it makes the book bigger, gives the reader more value, but it also gives exposure to these other bartenders. That was the thinking there.
That's really cool. I think, and actually, Jeannie's is a future guest on Drew's Virtual Happy Hour, so make sure you show up for that one. But what I really love about the recipes is that you could tell that nobody was kind of in your pockets with, hey, put our stuff in your book and everything like that, because there's so many different recipes that call for similar items, but they use like whatever that person uses. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was, and it's really subtle, and I don't know how many people would notice that, but I think maybe just because I'm, I sell products and I'm into brands and stuff like that. Right. I was like, man, he really calls out either like, Maggie's Farm stuff here or Small Hand Spoon here. And you could tell it was regional as well. And I thought that was really awesome. And I don't know if that was meant to be that, but I really appreciated that about the recipes.
Thank you. I mean, this is I think I'll address sort of a slightly broader topic, was like the recipe formatting, and it's a subtle thing that I think people appreciate without maybe even knowing it's there, is that every single recipe is consistent. Like, we didn't just like take the recipes and slap them in. Like, they're consistent. And so we spent an enormous amount of time reformatting the recipes, asking questions like, okay, you said pimento dram, but they had allspice dram, like basically standardizing recipes and then making them accessible, not dumbing them down, but like, they may say like, something like an orange and cherry flag. What does that mean? Okay, like asking questions like, we always had the reader's perspective in mind, that, that they may not know Jason Alexander. When he says this, he means this. So it was very much make it accessible for the reader, anticipates questions. But then also, the flip side of that is we wanted to respect the bartender's choices as well. So we're like, how do we normalize everything? How do we make a recipe accessible, but also not dumb down what the bartender said? So I'll take Oriel, for example, Oriel Elias. He was a rep for Trois-Rivières, how you say it. French is horrible, but he wants to call out his brand's rum, and it's like, it's great. And I want to respect that, but I also don't want the reader to say, well, I don't have, Cuvée Ocean, so damn it, I don't even know what that is, so I'm just going to pass that recipe by. So, a lot of that effort was basically like asking those questions. What could you use as a broader category? And that's how we came up with like the Minimalist Tiki rum categories. Is like, let's standardize on some basic things like Jamaican rums, like, let's standardize on these things and use a consistent sort of a broad category. So someone like the Smuggler's Cove book, where it uses like, uses Smuggler's Cove category rather than calling out a specific rum, but also, if they had a specific rum in mind, say, if you have it, this is what they would prefer you use. So we sort of like tried to straddle both worlds.
Yeah, again, I think you did a good job of that, because there's obviously things throughout. I mean, I have a pretty decent rum collection, and I was like, I was like, okay, I got to burn through some of these. How do I fit these in, and going back and forth? I will say that, the allspice and finding out that pimento were the same things was such an irritating part of mixology that I was just like, when I realized it, I was like, and this is why I hate bartenders sometimes. Like, this is just so ridiculous.
Yeah, there's so much lore and so much understanding, and like, oh, Don's mix. Like, well, okay, to a bartender, yeah, of course you're making Don's mix, but average bartender doesn't recall off the top of their head what Don's mix is. Like, okay, let's simplify it. It was very much enormous. We didn't just take the recipes and slap them in. It was an enormous amount of work to make them accessible, and I think people have responded to that. They like it. They're making the recipes, and that behind the scenes, people didn't see that work.
Right. Yeah. And again, it is appreciated. And so now we're going to get into, a couple more questions here for you. Sorry, I got to go back up here. Okay. So this is from CMC Curdy, and they are curious that you recently did a lot of research on the history of distribution in the military, specifically the Navy. And you have a book coming out on Navy. Was that the plan, or is it just?
Yeah. So the story with that is that while I was in the middle of writing a Tiki book, Alexander Gabriel Plantation came to me. It's like, we have a great idea for you. We'd love for you to research the history of London dock rums and British Navy rums. And I had no experience in historical research, but I'm like, this just sounds so cool. I'm gonna figure it out as I go. And to a certain extent, we did. But it was a fixed duration thing of like, go figure out what you can learn and write it in a way that we could publish it as a book someday. And I did that. That was pretty much my project, or completed for the most part by the end of 2019. And I've sort of handed off the manuscript to Ferrand, and their plan is to still publish it as a book alongside some of their own scientific research about dynamic aging. And I've given that talk a couple times on stage with Alexander. We talked about British Navy rum and London dock rums and what they were, and part of that process was, these rums came to England and they were shipped across the Atlantic in the 1800s and 1900s via boat that took 2-3 months, and there was a change in the rum's character as a result of being in a cask at a hot ship going for several months at a time and sloshing around. And so they've done some scientific research on that, and I've seen some preliminary data. So that book is still in process. As with most things with spirit companies, things always take a little longer than you would expect. But I've chat with them, and it's still in progress. Certainly COVID has slowed things down to a certain extent. So, but all my work's done. I've handed it off. I can't wait for people to see it. There's all sorts of surprises in there, and I've shared some of them, but there's many more interesting surprises to come. So.
Yeah, and speaking to that, your research is awesome, and I've consistently been blown away by it. And you were courteous enough to kind of share one of your resources with me, like all the historical newspapers through, and which was just great. That was so cool, and definitely a rabbit hole that's been very distracting from my real job.
Exactly. That's my fun time. It's like, I'm going to let myself be distracted by the archives.
Yeah, and so what you end up doing, and obviously I appreciate Cocktail Wonk, but I think one of my favorite things that you do is like the rum history page with Facebook as well, where you always come up with like old advertisements, descriptions of products, things like that, which I think is super rad. But is there not everybody's going to have the means to travel to different places and stuff like that you've been able to do, but like what would you recommend if someone's trying to learn? Are there books that they should definitely read? Are there resources they should look into? Like how
do you do that? I would say, I've definitely benefited from being able to go to London and, prowl through British National Archives, which is an amazing experience, to hold the actual history in your hands, to hold a letter, handwritten by H.H. Cousins from Jamaica is just like, it's a like kind of a life-changing experience to do that. But there's a phenomenal amount of resources out there, just in different online archives, and you kind of have to understand how they work and you have to beat your head against the wall for a little while to figure out, okay, these terms work, these ones don't. How do I filter? Obviously Google, is a great starting place, but Google oftentimes doesn't reach down into libraries like Copy Trust, things like that. There's stuff like JSTOR, which you typically need like university access, or I don't know if you can join as a subscription. I mean, some of this stuff is behind, firewalls that like you need, some sort of access to or pay for or whatever. The newspapers, archives, it's like, yeah, they're $60 for 4 months or 6 months or whatever, worth their weight in gold. So much of the history that you won't find written in books got reported sort of like in passing. In particular, one of the areas I'm fascinated with is the formation of the Jamaican spirits pool. Basically, what was going on in Jamaica in the 1910s, 20s, 30s, when basically the industry was about to collapse, and when they formed the spirits pool, and they put living on ester levels and all this kind of stuff. There's this fascinating history there, and really well documented in the Jamaican Gleaner, in bits and pieces over the course of 3, 4, 5 years. And that's not going to appear in any book like that. Nobody thought to write that book, but it's been sort of like reported in a newspaper, and we've got to plow through a lot of newspaper articles and save them off and read enough and start connecting dots. And that's the real challenge of history is we read a history book, like you read something like Wayne Curtis. Wayne or me or David Wondrich, we never come across this thing like, oh, here's all the information. We come across bits and pieces of it, like little dots. And I use the analogy of a pointillist map. I forget the name of the artist, but literally like every article or every book or every text or whatever is like, here's 3 more dots on the map or on the painting, and at some point you get to stand back and think, I think I see a boat and maybe a flower, and you're like, okay, if that's a flower, then I need more dots that might help me confirm that's a flower. But it's hard work, and you don't really know. It's like panning for gold, and you don't really know what you're going to come up with, and sometimes you get handed something and you're like, where does this go in there? So it's mentally exhausting, but also exhilarating work. When you come across something that like completely rewrites rum history, which has happened to me a few times, and you'll see some of it in the rum history book.
Nice, yeah. And
it's a very long-winded answer, but.
Well, I do think that you have a knack for making stuff digestible. Like most recently, when the TTB rolled out a lot of new proposals and stuff like that. I mean, that was a pretty hefty document.
Yeah.
That
even I couldn't read the entire thing.
I'm
good at skimming documents very quickly.
but yeah, you pulled out a lot of like the important stuff, and I know that I kind of went through it as well. I mean, I guess when you have time with the pandemic, that's what you do.
Yeah.
But so now kind of shifting focus to like the industry today, like the more that you learn, I mean, obviously you become this resource, but what do you find frustrating right now about the industry that you would like to see changed?
I mean, the spirits industry in general, the tiki industry, the rum industry.
Let's go tiki, because I always like taking shots at them.
Okay, so. And tiki. I don't know. It's I think sometimes there's all these debates about the purity, like this is tiki or this is not tiki. That's sometimes frustrating. And I don't get intimately tied with them, but in terms of the people who are part of tiki and the industry and the bars, there's not a whole lot for me to complain about. Like I think I consider them sort of like my worldwide family, and in the grand scheme of things I would complain about or say we should change this, I'd like to see no more Mai Tai recipes with grenadine and no lime juice, but that's like, those are like people who are not really in the tiki industry who are dabbling in it, and confusing the potential people who are interested. So, but yeah, for tiki itself, I can't really think of anything.
Yeah, and I know that you've talked about the rum community and how sometimes it can be kind of really polarizing, and if you don't fall into certain categories, you kind of get shamed out of the building. And I know that's something that I struggle with, because I have my own hills that I feel that I need to die on, even though I don't. But I make those arguments and kind of go head to head with the SEAL Army more often than I probably should.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I think there's for the most part, I think everybody, the intention is to raise the category, and I think that's ultimately what everybody wants to do. It's just sometimes when you convey that through a social media platform, it's not necessarily the best venue. But
everybody wants, I believe everybody has good intentions. They want to elevate the category. I think that, to a certain extent, a lot of passion is expended on things which are, portrayed as purity, or, issues, which at the end of the day may be economic issues. There's, a lot of what I see is like, a lot of times, the perception that people get, or, the story it's told is one layer, and that there's other layers underneath, that if you saw these other layers, you might have a different perspective on that. And every, all sides in an argument are going to portray it the way they want to. The reality is that there's oftentimes other things you're not aware of. And I'm not saying I'm not aware of everything, but I happen to know some things that other people don't. And I'm like, oh, okay, if with that perspective in your mind, you might have a different perspective. So
yeah,
that's my best political answer there.
I dig it, man. I think you're playing the game right. So Parker has a question, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute Parker. So Parker, go for it.
All right. Hey, Matt. Thank you again for doing it. My question is, I think a lot of this touches on, like what you talk about, I feel like a lot is like the categorization of rum.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there are no categories. Like, and the categories that exist are so confusing. So it's very hard to have a educated conversation about rum with maybe the average consumer. Mm-hmm. A lot of them are tied to the light and dark.
Right.
Yada yada. So
right.
How do you combat that? Right. Like, how do you what is that?
Right. Great question. Categories have been a very big part of what my life lately. The session I'm doing tomorrow is all about categories. So I've had a lot of time to think about it. The thing about, I keep coming back to the analogy I started in one of my articles about categories is I use, for example, vehicles. And it's like, well, how would you categorize vehicles? And you say, like, well, by color, or by maker, or by type of vehicle, or by state it's registered in. Like, you can create all sorts of categories. A category is really just one way of dividing things among several buckets. And this is a natural thing that I did for many years as a software developer, is to figure out how am I distributing information, or distributing things across different buckets. So that I naturally think, categorization comes naturally to me. But I think the thing you have to think about with any category is that three items. Like, number one, is it unambiguous? Like, is it technically like unchallengeable? Can any rational person look at your categorization and go, like, I understand the technical difference why you would put something in one bucket versus another bucket? So that's one. Number two, is it easy to understand? And number three, is it useful? And it's hard to find a category that answers all three of those questions great. So, for example, if you said, like, rum categorization by color, like answer those 3 questions. You say like, okay, well, is it unambiguous? Yeah, pretty unambiguous. It's like most people are going to agree that's a gold rum, that's a white rum, that's a dark rum. Is it easy to understand? Sure, it's easy to understand. Is it useful? No. That, and so, and then, and I would ask people like, go apply that categorization, those 3 questions to the Gargano categorization, go apply them to the Kate categorization. The reality is that in our everyday life, we use different categories in different situations. So like, again, from that article I wrote, it's like, well, when you're trying to find you're on the phone with somebody who's trying to, an Uber driver, and you're trying to tell them, Uber driver's trying to tell you, what you're looking for, the color categorization is perfect. It's exactly what, it's very useful at that moment in time, but it's not useful when you need to go to the DMV and register your car. So we intrinsically switch between categories all the time, based on the context. And I think that the categories that evolved over time, primarily things like by color, are easy. They fit those first 2 things. They're easy to understand. I'm sorry. They fit one of them. They're easy to understand. They're not terribly useful. So we have to educate people like, well, why is it not useful, and hopefully give them a better way of understanding and like a more useful context. And that's a particular challenge with rum, because it's so diverse that, for an enthusiast, we can say, oh, well, it's Jamaican. And we know this Jamaican funk, or we know rum agricole, like we know that sort of grassy agricole note, but to a non-enthusiast who's just coming into it, those make no sense. And so I don't claim there's any great answers, but I think that, start with the people who want to learn, and give them a foundation of knowledge that's actually useful to them, that actually helps them sort of form an idea in their own head about what these things are. So I don't know if that answered the question, but.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, it's a pretty tough question to answer. And Parker did follow up with a question, if you could link that article referenced. Was that the most recent article that you put out? The
one I just put out is essentially, like maybe categories are not what, maybe categories are not always the ideal way to solve what we're trying to do.
Would you say that maybe they suck?
I believe some of them do, yeah.
That's the title of your talk tomorrow. So.
That is the title of it. Yeah, I mean, I would say that to a certain extent, a category can be technically accurate, it can be unimpeachable, but the question is then, okay, can you explain this to somebody and then have them A, understand it, and then B, retain it, and be able to successfully use it after that point in time? So, for example, if you're going into, like Rumba basically had their rum list, and it was categorized 2 ways. One was by country, and one was by Gargano. And, it was like, okay, we can browse through the list either way. Did more people who were looking for the next rum to try, did they go to the Gargano list, or did they go to the country list? I don't know. It's a good question.
We're gonna have to reach out to Ram Dahl about that and see what he says.
Oh, well, yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, see what.
Yeah, but like I'm not dinging any one category. I'm saying like, well, in some contexts it makes absolute perfect sense. It may be the perfect way in that particular conversation, and in another conversation, it may not be. You go to a bartender who wants a funky rum, and they don't care if it's Jamaican or River Ranch Plum, but they want a funky rum, and say, well, you need a pure single rum. That's not necessarily helpful to them.
Can you explain the difference between the Gargano and or just kind of maybe a quick synopsis of what that looks like?
I always have to look back at the chart. The primary ones are, like pure single run versus, I forget the terminology, it's changed over time. But one is, like one rum is like a rum distilled at a single distillery on a batch still. Like that's pure single rum. But there's no, the aging does not enter into categorization. So Rum Fire is a pure single rum, as is Hampton Estate is also a pure single rum. Then there's, I think it's like pure blended rum, I think, or not, I forget the terms have changed, I think. But there's one basically where it's from a column still. And there are ones where it's like a rum from multiple distilleries. I can just go look at the chart and instantly have it back in my head, but it's essentially a categorization based on production parameters, certain production parameters, and it's a fairly large, and the buckets are fairly large, like from one distillery, not from one distillery, batch still versus not batch still. So yeah. Oh yeah. Hold on, my wife. Pure single rum, pure single agricole rum. So the agricole rum separates cane juice from non-cane juice. Traditional rum is from a column, and modern rum is anything that's not one of the other three. So, it's technically impeccable. Like you can look at any rum and ask the right questions and put it in the category. Is it useful in every context over some other categorization? Not necessarily.
And Corey just dropped a link into the chat as well. So Corey, thank you for that. From Villier on just some breakdown of it.
Right.
With all the history that and research that you've done and gone through, and I know you're pretty well traveled. You've been to a lot of different places, but assuming we figure out time machines in the next couple of years, what either person or distillery are you going to travel to take a closer look at or talk to?
Well, like I said, I would love to go to New Yarmouth, but
It's a time machine too.
a time machine. Go back in time.
Yeah. We gotta be. It's like potentially like closed distilleries. Maybe influencers of the category. Stuff like that. Really flex that history muscle right now.
Yeah. What?
Navy.
Safety? What?
Navy.
Oh, the Navy. Oh, so okay. So I was limiting it to just distilleries, but if I could go back in time, a particular moment in time, anything having to do with rum production, I would go back to London, probably the late 1800s, go into the West India docks and go into the Navy, the Navy blending yards. There's so much went on in there and so lightly documented that, there's like little tantalizing bits and pieces of it, but to see the actual, I've yet to see a single picture of the batting system the Navy had in London, something like 250,000 gallons of basically 160 proof rum over 32 vats, and I've yet to see a single picture of that. That would be astounding. Or to go into like the West India docks, the rum vaults there, 40,000 puncheons of, again, like 160 proof rum, and they couldn't have any electric lights in there because it would be a fire hazard. And they had this crazy system with basically like reflectors and lights coming down from the ceiling, and people holding up sticks with tin on them to reflect light so they could read the cask. I've only seen one picture, and I think there's so much more I haven't seen. So that's the great mystery to me is what's in there. So I'm sure Mitch, who I see is on here, would also love to see that. So
yeah, he came into another happy hour that I had done, and was talking about those just all those different pipes leading into one vat you know, that they would like blend everything together, and it didn't really seem like, and it was all just describing it, because like you said,
yeah,
if you're not,
yeah. I mean, it vast questions as well. Like if you think about about how much rum the Navy went through and how it would have been delivered to them, you're like they were getting, I don't know, like 20, 30 puncheons a day. Like, what did they do with all these casks? Like, did they like dump them and immediately hand them back to you? You know, and you know, there's also, you know, the great question of like, was ED&F Man you know, the loan supplier to British Navy for like 180 years, whatever, and all evidence, I have a lot of evidence that says they're not. But like, be able to go back and ask that question and say, is there something I haven't, you know, not aware of here? You know, would be awesome.
Yeah, and you know, it reminds me of you know, one of the things that we've talked about just personally together is like Lemonheart. Like, when did the switch happen from like Jamaican to the Guyana? Like, there's just so many mysteries out there.
Yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah.
You know,
and every once in a while, you come across the next, you know, next little thing in a newspaper. Like, oh, you know, it's like it's you know, either a dot that connects to other dots, or it's like it's a dot that doesn't connect them. Like, where the hell did this come from? So, me and Lance, and then Wondrous joined in. The whole like, where did 151 come from? Was quite a crazy, you know, historical day trying to like piece it together. And like, Wondrich had this one little piece of information that took me down yet another path. And you know, now Dave and I seem to have a difference in opinion about something, which is all fine. And like, you know, historians, and you know, we each have our own data, but there's like layer upon layer, and every once in a while you come across something crazy, like, oh, the dominant rum in the British Navy blend in 1944 was Cuban rum. Who knew? You know? So
yeah, no, it's super cool. And you know, for my final question, then we'll open it up just to everybody. But you know, you've obviously had some really cool experiences, you know, during this time of Cocktail Wonk and stuff like that. And I wonder, has there ever been a moment where you kind of sat back and you're like, holy crap, I can't believe I'm here right now, you know, in this position for this rum thing?
Yeah. You know, I would say the one that was just about a year ago, that was I went to St. Lucia, basically interviewing for the WURSPA role, and I get called into the, you know, boardroom, and it's like, oh, there's the head of J. Ray and Nephew, you know, CEO of J. Ray and Nephew, and there's the head of St. Lucia Distillers, and there's the head of National Rums in Jamaica, there's the head of Mountain Gay, there's the head of WURSPA, and they're all there looking at me, you know, like, what is he gonna say? You know, like, how is this my life? You know, that like 3 years earlier, it's just like, you know, some other guy just enjoying rum and posting on Facebook. So yeah, you know, sometimes like that. Like when I got to visit Maine Rum Company, I was one of the very few people at the time who'd been in Maine Rum Company. Again, like, holy cow, you know, like, you know, it still seems incredible. You know, and I know a lot of work went into it to get to that point, but still, like, how the hell did this become my life? So.
Very cool. All right. So with that said, does anybody have any questions for Matt while we
I'm
still
here.
have his attention?
Ask away. Geek out.
Yeah. I mean, I know we did have one question. Let's see. Let me scroll back up. If you could only stock one overproof rum in your house, which one would it be?
We could go off on a whole topic of we shouldn't call them overproof rums. So okay, you know, I'm gonna go by the, you know, the correct definition of overproof. So it'd have to be 100 over 57% ABV. You know, obviously Lemonheart, you know, Lemonheart 151, you know, Demerara 151 would be, you know, it'd be hard to not have that in there. I do particularly enjoy OFTD, you know, sort of kind of like a Lemonheart, but kind of different. Got some other stuff. You know, technically all the Jamaican overproofs, you know, the, you know, Rum Fire, it's like, it's, you know, it's again, which is your favorite what's your favorite child? I can't, you know, it's like, like, well, am I going to give up lemon heart to, to keep from fire? Yeah,
Well, I sell
I
lemon.
would have, I would have to say that, like, like, if I had to be like, okay, you have to live a life without Demerara rum or a life without high proof Jamaican rum, I would probably have to go with Jamaican rum. So
fair enough. Parker wants to know, what is your favorite Smith and Cross tidbit?
Oh, everybody likes to think that it's from Hampton Estate. Some of it presumably is from Hampton Estate. There are some things I know which I, sort of should not say, just because, try to respect confidentiality in certain things. But if you were to look at the timeline, it's like, well, when did, go back in time and say, when did Smith and Cross come out? And then look at the timelines of, was the distillery operating? Could they have had this rum? If you again do sort of like the historical work I've had to do of, like, ask the questions and gather the information and say, like, does the information I have meet the assumption I have? I think if you did that for Smith and Cross way back, you might not come to the assumptions entirely Hampton Estate rum. And I would sort of leave that out there as a challenge. Like, if you do the work, post your work, and I'll tell you if it matches what I've done. So.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions?
A quick question, Matt. It's Mark. How is it living in New Orleans from a rum perspective? It's great to visit, but you're there every day. Is that?
Yeah, it's funny. I've not been over to Steve's house since we moved here, and we made an attempt to go to is it Black Swan or Black
Duck.
Black Duck. We made an attempt to go to Black Duck, which supposedly has a amazing rum selection, and they were closed that one night. Somehow they haven't tried since then, and of course now there's a lockdown. The rum selection is better than Seattle, not as good as California, obviously. So I'm annoyed as hell that I can't order from High Time. Like the rum selection could be a lot worse here. It's not so bad. We do have some interesting distilleries. Roulet-San in particular is really interesting stuff. Like, they're the closest thing I've seen to an American distillery that's doing something almost Jamaican-like. So.
Nice.
Well, Matt, if you need us to send you some olive oil, from California.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. The next time I have something, yes, a bit of olive oil needs, I know who to hit up.
Yeah, we can definitely do that for you. Any more questions?
Yeah, I'm here.
Quick question, Matt. So when I asked you for what would be an appropriate cocktail to make for this evening, for this Zoom conversation, you responded with 3 recipes.
Mm-hmm.
Shores of Indal, Three Sons, and Black Pot.
Black Pot.
Were those just the first 3 that you came up with, or was there any particular reason you thought they might be?
Just the first 3. The Shores of Indal, because it's because I knew I'd be making it just for myself tonight, and like I love the peated Scotch, and it's a fun recipe from the book that hasn't gotten the love of that, like the Commando Grog or the Quarantine Order has, but I think it's pretty cool. The Four Sons is also just another one from the book that people have responded well to, surprising to me. I wish I could figure out why the hell I named it that. It's like someday it'll come to me. And then the Black Pot, just because you were the one who persisted and figuring out how I came up with that name.
I'll have to make it really soon. As much as I love the Mr. Valley High, so I'll have to do that one soon. But I usually use my coffee liqueur, in the midday cocktail, not for late evening.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to actually get a variety of different coffee liqueurs and experiment with them. I did try adding some a little bit of gum to my pineapple or pineapple syrup, which was already really thick, and tried it again, and it didn't come out quite the way I was expecting. So I'm gonna revisit it again. Once I've dialed it in, I'm gonna probably write that one up. and get a good picture of it as well for the blog. So it should be in print at some point.
Cool. Thanks.
One thing I did want to ask you about, Matt, I forgot, is you actually are kind of like the historian for Devil's Reef and Jason Alexander's cocktail list.
Yes.
Like you basically have it all, essentially cataloged and everything like that.
Right.
Which I think is amazing because obviously, as you had mentioned earlier, like he obviously has a ton of respect for the history of Tiki, but then also does his own little riffs and stuff like that.
Right.
It's really kind of cool that he does that
without feeling the need to go off into crazy stuff.
Right, totally. And I just wondered, like, do you have anything else that's like kind of in that same vein with anybody else, or things that you like have collected that you're just kind of weird that you have them?
I think I share a lot of stuff with Brian Maxwell. He sometimes gives some of his stuff before they've appeared in public. I think with this recent blogging, a lot of that stuff has come out. I do seem to have the skill of talking a recipe out of a bartender, and I'm very fortunate in that regard. But nobody else has their own dedicated OneNote section for their recipes.
Nice. Okay. Anybody else? You guys have any questions? Parker, another question?
I'm curious about okay, so when you go to other bars and they're making syrups and orgeats and it's all like, it can be 2 to 1, 1 to 1. There's so many variations, you know what I mean? So it's like, how do you, when you're judging these things across different bars or different techniques, different bartenders, schools of thought, like, for example, like 2 to 1s are so viscous, like, how do you find like a balance in all of that and kind of judge across, because it varies so much.
Right. I think I wrote about this a little bit in the book. I said like this is an issue, and some people are 1 to 1 simple and some are 2 to 1, and some like my pineapple syrup that I made, I actually don't know what the hell it is, because I put enough, the sugar I put in, soaked up a lot of liquids. I don't know. It's probably 3 to 1. I don't know. I do wish there was some standardization that like bartenders would would sort of like include that basic note. Like when I made this, it was 2 to 1, or I made it 1 to 1. There's like some semblance of its relative sweetness. And I'm sure there's probably, you could use a refractometer or some way to judge the relative sweetness per ounce or whatever. But I do think it's an ongoing, issue. Like, well, when I make it with that orgeat from that bar, if I make it with Small Hands orgeat, it's nowhere near as sweet as like a Gaffard orgeat. And so we're sort of like up to, the people who are trying it at home. And I think when you're first starting out, you don't necessarily know that the relative sweetness or tartness of the lime or whatever, it's all adjustable. Like you need to figure out like what works for you, and like you may that just because you made a drink according to the recipe and it doesn't taste great, it may just not be balanced. You need to do that balancing yourself. And I think that that's part of the education, of home bartenders, is sort of like do the flavors work? Great. Then okay. Then don't be afraid to screw around with the ratios and have a methodology. And my methodology is typically like something's out of balance. Like what can you reduce, not what can you add. Have some methodology. But yeah, it's a problem, and I don't have a great answer for it.
And I think we probably close out on this question. Future projects, what should we expect from the Cocktail Wonk?
Yes. There's a few things that I cannot share specifics of, but I think they're pretty cool. A few people who were involved know about them, but the one you should probably see in 3 or 4 months. Obviously, that's not the that's one. And then obviously whenever the Navy rum book, Navy and British Stock rum book comes out, that may not be till next year. And then there's a really big project that's going to make Minimalist Tiki look like a like a 2-weekend jaunt. Really big project that I think people are really going to love. So you might be able to hazard a guess, but
Is it an encyclopedia?
it's not the Wondrich the Wondrich Oxford Companion. It's not that epic, but yes, there's something that if you watch what I've been doing and watch what I've been writing and covering and thinking about, you maybe can connect some dots. So.
Very good. Well, we're all looking forward to it. Matt, you've always been extremely approachable, and you've always been very generous with your knowledge. So, thank you for coming and hanging out with us tonight.
No, my pleasure.
If people have follow-up questions or anything for you, where should they reach out to?
Facebook Messenger is always good, or email cocktailwonk@gmail.com.
Nice.
Yeah, people message me on Instagram, and I forget to check it 90% of the time. And oh, you messaged me a week ago. And just shoot me an email, shoot me a messenger. A lot of you here know that you just shoot me stuff on Messenger. It's all fine.
Yeah, you're really, really awesome about that. Well, again, thank you for coming out. Everybody else, thank you for joining. This is the last happy hour of April. And so, I'll be launching the May schedule on Friday. So if you guys enjoyed yourselves tonight, I'm going to have a lot of cool rum people. Actually, a lot of the topics are all over the place for May. And I'm excited about it. I'm also bummed because we're still sheltering in place. But, feel free to add me on Facebook or, follow me on Instagram, dgarrison6. And I'm always posting about the stuff on there. But, stay safe out there. Stay healthy. Matt, thank you again. You're the best. Everybody, cheers. Have a good night, and hopefully I see you again on Drew's Virtual Happy Hour.
Hey, cheers.
See you guys.